Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jeremiah, and we are having a very good webinar. A lot of effort here. I know Jake is probably with me. We're looking forward to when we're done with this webinar, just because this is one of the harder ones to prep for, because there's just so much involved, and we need to make sure we're ready to cover everything. So we've been having a rough week getting ready for this, coming right off of the last trade show. So I hope you appreciate how much effort we've put into this. So strap back in. We are recording this, so you'll be able to watch it again. And in fact, there's definitely some points that are just intended for you to watch the recording, so you can pause it, so we can get all the information necessary on the screen, but not have to just painfully read all of it. So that'll be helpful. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I'd recommend clicking that right now and get that little box situated. Not only would that be easier for you to type in questions, which I'm sure you will have some, but you can also see the answers that we type out to any other questions. So it's just a really good companion to the webinar, and kind of helps to not have to ask a question that's already been asked. Other than that, we got a lot to cover. So hey, Jake, take it away.
Very good. Thank you, Jer. So as you guys can tell, and who's joining us today, definitely a good span of people here. So welcome everybody. If you are new to irrigation effects, land effects, and you're trying to customize things and understanding that kind of concept, I want to just sort of start with a little bit of advice. And that advice is try and give the default out of the box, setup a shot. Make sure you have somewhat of an understanding of its workings a little bit more before you go full-fledged and try to customize every little bit of it. Because what you're going to find is there are obviously bits and pieces of this that depend on one another. As you customize something, it affects something else. So just having a base understanding of how land effects is functioning and how all the components from a customization perspective works is going to be super important, and it's going to reduce the headache and the frustrations that you might get if you just full-fledged try to customize everything before actually starting something. So that being said, this is me. I've done plenty of these webinars. You should recognize my face. So we'll move right past that. But what we want to cover is really three main points, intermixed with questions, of course, but really what within irrigation effects is customizable, where you're going to change those things, how you're going to change those things, and it really breaks down into two separate little buckets. And that's the main focus that we're going to kind of try to focus on today, and that is setting those standards for just your standards and for any projects going forward. But if we have time at the end, if you guys have questions about this, we could definitely try to hit on this a little bit, but making changes to projects with old standards. So we always say that you should have a standard for your office that is customizable, flexible, sustainable, but can change with time, So being able to make those changes, you might have projects that potentially span across those standards. So having an understanding of what you're changing, what those standards are, what you're customizing, you'll have a better understanding of what's going to actually be affected as you move through those changes across projects. That does not mean that you should be adjusting your standards, what we're going to be covering today, and making these changes just because you're not happy with stuff. The goal is to really hone in on these things, test it, make sure you're good with the printing, make sure you're good with the look, make sure you're good with this stuff, so that you can set it and know that Land Effects is going to help manage that standard and keep that as a structured, sustainable look for you across the board. So let's just jump right into it. So what can be changed? And in a nutshell, and I'm going to say this as just a general statement, everything can be customized. So from your layers that are being used, the colors that those layers are using, the fonts that all the symbols use, and then going down through different options, design options, what your defaults are from a scheduling and pipe data perspective, and then of course the symbols, what symbols are being assigned as defaults per equipment, and then of course the shape and the look and the size of the blocks, of course, are customizable, because what we got to remember here is we're just in AutoCAD. So we're harnessing all of that capability and just applying it in a way that we can keep it standard. But what we need to understand is, while everything is customizable, that is to an extent. And if you're going to go into this and say that, land effects should be customizable so that I can get it to be exactly how everything looked and functioned before using land effects, that's somewhat of an unrealistic expectation, simply because what we're bringing to the table is a lot more automated function. And so some of those automated functions need to perform in a certain way. So while we still can alter everything in the system, it's going to be based on what exactly you're trying to look for and cater to, that we might have to make some sacrifices on, but not even sacrifices, but let's meet in the middle with how this goes. I put this in here as a place that we can pause, if we're rewatching this, and we'll obviously provide all these links to all these different other resources that we have already. But going into actually customizing specific pieces of equipment, our drip symbols, drip hatches, how you can reorder that kind of stuff. And then just a couple other fun little power tips that show off a couple of the other tools that I'm going to mention is a great resource. So we'll provide all the links and stuff right here. But another good webinar, and we have plenty more than this for sure, but is improving the Cad standards. And I highly recommend that one, just from the standpoint that as we're going through this, as we're, as an office talking about customizing our own stuff or land effects to be our own, and that webinar kind of hits in a couple of different points of what to focus on, what to think about as you're actually doing that, and what you guys can start to come to a realization that maybe it's not so important that I try to hold this because of what else I'm gaining out of it. So that's that. Where do these changes happen? Now, of course, we're going to go through these live, but it's good to get an understanding of sort of the connection between the two spots here. So when it comes to layers and the colors that are being used, there's the preference set section that we can start to look at. And what we need to understand is this is broken out into two buckets. This first bucket, being the preference set, has the layers that Land Effects is using to really manage, and as you insert things and as it's doing it and performing its automated functions, that it's doing all of the layer management for you from where does that piece of equipment land and how does it function? Where does that hatch land? Instead of you having to manually make sure that that layer is active and so on and so forth, this will automatically generate it on the fly and make sure that everything is nice and neat as it gets put onto the plan itself. Then the other side of that, and obviously there's a color assigned to each one of those layers. Now, some of those colors aren't going to matter fully. Obviously, it's that way just from a legibility standpoint, but it doesn't matter because then we have the layers within the blocks themselves. And we are strong believers that, layers shouldn't be something that you try to limit so that you can try to manage everything through the layer property manager and put everything on layer 0. There's a lot of CAD practices that we try to break bad habits of and stuff like that. But we say it shouldn't matter that there are tons of different layers, within the blocks, because we have a lot of other different tools that if you need to make changes, if you need to make adjustments, that you have the tools that you need in order to make those things a lot more painless in making those adjustments. But understanding that there are layers within blocks and there are layers that those blocks reside on. And so where those that correlation goes is sort of how you're going to start to make those changes in the long run there. I'm going to say this note a couple different times, and you'll see this here, but preferences are always going to be the starting point. And this is our preference set manager here, but there's going to be certain changes that actually then pour over to being done locally, meaning project by project, this preference set is the boilerplate starting point, 80% of the way, get everything managed how you want it, and it's going to hold it that way so that you can keep your standards. But as it ports over and you're working in your design, there are going to be things that are adjusted on the project level and not now changed here in the preferences. Far too many times, people are trying to customize things, and so they're constantly making changes, or they think they need to make changes here as they work on a project. And that starts to then mess up the next project. And now the projects look different. Maybe it's the symbols, the shapes, the colors, the layers. They start to manipulate things in the wrong place. So it's really important to know that the preference set is going to be the starting point, something that you should set. And we've heard the phrase set it and forget it. I don't say forget it in the sense that you don't need to worry about this. We should manage this, but it should be the place that you know that once you've set it, that is the starting point of your defaults and what you've actually customized. So with that, though, the importance of the preference set is one thing that I'll just harp on a little bit right now, and just understand that you can set several different preference sets, which I'll show live, but this gives us the flexibility then to, if we have certain cities or municipalities or agencies that have layers set a specific way that you need to adhere to, that your custom office setup that you would normally do stuff in doesn't have to be harmed in how you actually set things up. So just understand that you can set different preferences up that alter the look of whether it's the textiles, the text size, the scheduled defaults, all of that kind of stuff, so that you don't have to continue to go back and try to set things back to the original way you typically do something on a normal project. Fonts are going to be the same thing. We've got a section in the preference set, and if you're not familiar with it already, we have textiles that get assigned to everything. Everything that LandEffects does, there is a specific textile that we harness here in the preference set that you get a set, and it will start to manage and define those textiles. But obviously within the blocks, there is that text potentially that is in that block. And so we want to make sure that if we're doing all kinds of custom symbols and stuff like that, that one, you're aware that if you're trying to make changes here in your preference set to your textiles and it's not being modified in your blocks, there's a potential that you're either not using the right textile or something's just not in line that way. So just understanding that when we create these blocks with the textile in mind that is assigned to here. So changing things up, whether it's in the block or if you're trying to update that kind of stuff, we do have, again, a great resource of commands that I'll try to get into at the end if we have time to show you how some of those work. But and we got a couple links here to actually show every textile and what's sort of assigned to those and what uses those specific textiles that way. But again, being in the preference set, having the flexibility, you need to adjust these fonts, the font sizes and stuff like that in order for it to then define those styles on the fly as it inserts is super important. When we get into the design options, we're really talking about a couple different things, and this is our symbol and equipment defaults. Now, in just a slide or two, I'm actually going to show you how either they are done on the fly or set in the preference set here, but we have specific symbols that have a default, because when it comes to spray symbols, that's probably the biggest chunk of a symbol set that you need to be able to be assigned to every possible nozzle option. So to have the ease of use to be able to pick that kind of stuff, it is set here in your preferences, and we'll go over this live as well and show you how to read those and then navigate the irrigation symbols DWG. But then we have our pipe defaults, and the pipe defaults go into a couple different sections. We've got our pipe data defaults, which are going to be really what class of pipe that we plan to use on a day-to-day basis, those sizes that get applied to that, but then how those pipe sizes function, whether or not you are going to color code those sizes, and if they have lassos, and just everything that interacts about those pipes. You have the flexibility of listing right here. Our unit defaults, obviously important from a metric to imperial preference set, but being able to, again, set up several different preference sets allows you to set a whole standard and customize a whole standard and the pipe classes being used and how you actually read that flow and pressure per preference set is going to be sort of done just right there. And again, being able to leave this as is and not keep changing it is super important as you are working on a project. You know, you don't want somebody to switch this to liters per second and bars and then resize a whole system that used to be done, you know, in gallons per minute and PSI, because it will update numbers and start throwing stuff off. So just understanding that some things will then just, if it is set this way, apply to whatever you're working on. And then we have our schedule defaults. Our schedule defaults is going to be really the sort of the most simple and straightforward, because once these are set, yes, you can run a schedule and you're still going to be able to choose however you run the schedule at that point in time, but it's just that initial setup of 80%. I'm going to typically run my schedules like this, you know, so it's just making that quicker pass so you don't have to click as many options if you don't want to. And then, of course, we've got a few more files that we're going to reference and link to, but understanding how the pipe labels work and just understanding some of these options and how you might be able to define some of our old style label callouts if you're used to those, and getting into then irrigation, the schematic side of things obviously is one thing. It's just tied to the preference set. So I just felt like I should link it there. And then understanding pipe data more fully. We're not going to go into the ins and outs of it. I'll give you a rundown of it, but if you wanted to go over it more there, we'll provide that link. And then symbols. So as it pertains to the symbols specifically, and I think this is sort of the most common, hey, I want to customize symbols type of a thing, we need to have an understanding of when and where and how they get called. So from a call-out perspective, and this goes to pipe size, pipe call-outs, and the valve call-out specifically, those are our two main call-outs there is going to be a default on how it functions. But then at the same time, as we're going through the project, we can assign and change the call-out as a one-off type of a thing. So we want to make sure that we understand that this is going to be how it pulls and where it pulls. So the example that we're going to go over live is I do want to kind of cover how to create this, because I think this is the most common. We're going to make our own valve call out, and it doesn't show up here, and how does that function? So I do want to try to hit that if we have time. But hatches, what hatches get set, and this specifically relates to drip line from an irrigation perspective, but those get set on the fly. Those get, if you add a drip area, it automatically gets assigned the first hatch in the list. And then if you add another one, it automatically gets assigned to the second hatch in the list. So it's already predefining which hatch it's going to get. So from the beginning of this PowerPoint, I listed the how to save your own drip hatches or how to customize those drip hatches. We have a great power tip on how to go through that process. So that's one thing I won't be covering live here, but we have a great resource on that. Drawing symbols, again, depends on what symbols you're talking about, what irrigation symbols you're talking about that get set here. Specifically, spray symbols are the only one currently that actually get defined as a preference set family and sort of a hard set. This is what I'm going to use as I add a turf spray to my project. It's going to automatically pull this. If I add another turf spray, it's going to automatically pull this family. If I add a shrub spray, 2, 3, 4 shrub sprays, this is the list that it follows. So being able to customize this and understand how this functions is going to be really important. But on a overall view of how the symbols function and get placed in on the fly, is it does adhere to this scaling representation. Now, what I've seen all too often is people will change this just almost every project based on what they want to see. And this is where we need to just have an understanding of, let's practice with our customization and the look that we want on a layout, a typical layout, so that we can see how the heads place. If we're happy with that, that's how we should leave this preference set. The scale that gets assigned to the drawing is going to then manage the symbols placed on the plan so that on paper they all look the way that you plotted them and tested them out. So that's what's important to know, is as Land Effects inserts those symbols into the drawing, they are inserting it assuming that this is the look that you want on paper. So just a really important to note that this should be and is here to be able to adjust so that you don't have to go through and size every one of the drawing files down or whatever, but you can make that change here and it will insert it at half the size or 100% of the size or double the size or anywhere in between. But other symbols that get set on the fly, those are things like rotor symbols, valves, emitters, other pieces of equipment. All those types of equipment automatically get assigned the respective symbol based on that category of equipment, and they get incrementally assigned. So if you keep adding a valve, it will just go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So you're not going to have the same symbol look. But if you go too high, obviously we might not have the symbol. You'll get a missing file error. So it's really important to know that if you're going to set up your own equipment, you should have enough symbols to match how many pieces of equipment that you're planning on having or keep adding. So our schedule symbols, again, are set based on what was placed in the drawing typically, but this one specifically, the only different one that, again, I'm going to clarify here is the valve callout. Being able to see the valve callout option here is all based on the schedule symbol itself. So additional files, we're going to open up the irrigation symbols drawing there, but just understanding preferences as a whole, and then some of the pipe label stuff is pretty important there. But hitting it one last time, preferences are always going to be that starting point. Let's get it set to where you're typically not going to have to change these settings, but then you can change things project by project basis. Last one here, and this is going to obviously depend on where your Land Effects folder is, whether it's local on a server, but this is just in a nutshell where these types of things exist, and we'll navigate those live there. But the hatches, again, we have a great power tip that shows how to utilize the Save Hatch tool with your hatch patterns. So as you, as a company or the CAD manager, are setting up these custom hatches and what you're going to be using, you're going to want that master hatch resource that shows how things are set up in your office. So being able to utilize our hatch patterns DWG and save those hatches in so that you have a reference file that you can open and just modify and edit, and then use the Save Hatch tool to be able to update those standards and customize those standards is how that function is going to work there. Our drawing symbols, again, is all about just simply being blocks, whether it relates to the emitter, the equipment, rotors, valves, you name it. There's going to be a folder in our blocks folder that is the house for each one of those types of components. So we're going to kind of go over that irrigation symbols drawing and kind of navigate how that works. But then again, each, especially from a spray perspective, each one of those schedule symbols relates specifically to the equipment that you're using. So there is going to be a schedule symbol. If you modify any one of your blocks here, you are going to need to potentially update that schedule symbol so that it reflects the changes that you made on a one-by-one basis. But again, at the first of this PowerPoint, there were the power tips, customizing the symbols options. It goes over all of that. So that's one thing that we're not going to spend time on here. So last note, it's all just CAD. At the end of the day, we are working in AutoCAD. If you have to do something and modify something, remember your CAD training, remember the blocks get defined in the drawing, remember your block edit, remember your layer property manager if you need to adjust something. It's all just AutoCAD. So that being said, I'm going to make sure that you guys all know Q&A. Please get your questions in as we go here so we can kind of hit that. But if there's nothing, Jer, we'll get going.
Yeah, take it away.
All right. So before I go right over into CAD, I did want to just point out that as we're getting started in this, whether you're an old-time user and you know everything about it, we have these getting started guides that go a lot deeper into different things. And one in the irrigation getting started guide at the end of the guide there, bottom pages, is the printout of all of the different symbols that we have. Okay, so we're going to open the main DWG up because it looks a teeny bit different than this, but just so you understand what we're after when we're trying to customize and figuring out what symbols we want to use, if it's all of our own symbols, just knowing that doing a printout like this is printed out at the 1:20 scale. It's a pretty common typical scale, and that's how all of ours are kind of default set up so that they plot nicely at that scale. But just knowing that this is what we should be doing from a customizing standpoint. If we're going to go through this effort, we should be printing them out like this, seeing how they look, and then applying those to a design. We don't want to just make stuff and then do a whole design. We're not happy with it, and now we got to try to fix everything. It should be let's test it, see how it places, see how it looks printed, and then kind of go from there. But you do have a whole list of all of our stuff printed out so that you can actually see what they look like if you want to without you having to go through. That's in our irrigation getting started guide stuff there. So now we're back over here. So we're going to kind of restart and kind of go from the beginning a little bit again, but understanding that on our different tabs, we are going to have our preference set per tab related there, but our FX admin is a great home base that shows all of our preferences. So we're just going to go to our general preferences here and just have an understanding now of what this actually means. I have my imperial preference set. This is just sort of my default, but I also can make additional preferences. And if you watch the layers here, this is going to be how easy it is to start customizing what those layers are, what they need to be, and how you can really quickly switch between. So if I start on a project and I need to have those layers a certain way, I can already have them set up based on the preference set style that I have set. So how to do that, just really quick, whatever preference set you have as like your default that you want to sort of change from that point on, is you're going to have that set active. You're going to hit manage, and you're going to say new. As soon as you say new, it's taking the one that you have active and it's going to copy everything as this new name. And once you do that, you can make those changes, make all the modifications you need to, and it will be its own unique one, and the one that you had initially active will be left alone. So super important to know that. That's how I made my Imperial Customize, is I started with Imperial, I said new, and then I named it Imperial Customized. This is alphabetical, so if you guys want your default preference set to be at the very top, I suggest making a copy and putting a little dash or something that's going to kick it to the top of the list so that it's always sort of your set active preference set to pick from. So with that in mind, understanding again that these layers all pertain to anything within land effects. So it's not just irrigation, but you can get into the LI section, and that's our irrigation layers. You can modify any one of these layers, change its name, change its color, its line type, and whether or not it plots. So land effects, especially if this is, again, happening after the fact and you have these layers defined in the drawing somewhere, it's going to do its best, obviously, to, if you change this here and accept those changes, that it'll try to match that into the layer manager. But just know that these are the layers that, as you insert a drip hatch, and this is a good little description here, and this description is never going to go away. This is our land effects default, so that you can, if by some force of the universe somebody changed all of the layers to be literally irrigation, land effects is still going to handle all of these uniquely and put everything on. It will be the only layer there, but we'll have a sense of what it still used to be, so that you can potentially put it back if needs be. So highly recommend against that. But that's where you're going to sort of set those up. Now, a really good one, and this is something that I use all the time. You know, we have thousands and thousands of blocks. All those blocks have potentially different layers and names and colors that we have as sort of a standard and a default that we need to make sure we adhere to. So being able to audit layers, this is just one thing that I want to kind of cover right now, because it's such a awesome tool. I think it's a little bit underutilized, to be honest, but to be able to add a single file to audit, or a whole folder, or folders within folders, to be able to go through here, and I've set up a little set to do this for, but if I want a snapshot of what all of my files have from a layer perspective, and again, depending on what you're trying to get after, you might do a smaller set of items, but along with all these other additional features that Batchman does, and I'm not going to save any of this stuff, but I just want to look at what layers and what colors are being used for those layers across just a few different blocks themselves. Because what this is going to let me do, not only just let me see it, but especially if I've done all this legwork and I've customized all of my symbols, and now I've got to go through and make sure that, you know, everything is set up the way that I initially intended it to be set up wise, from a layer perspective and from a color perspective. I can simply run Batchman on a whole folder with all of the files in there, and it's going to give me this report. It's going to say, okay, here's what those interior block layers are. So these are now referencing what we had discussed, whether it was preference layer versus block layer. These are all layers that they found, that land effects found within any one of those files. And so if I can see that, okay, I've got all of my good thicknesses and those are the right colors because those are how those colors are going to plot, And if I see that everything is named right, maybe I had a misspelled one, or maybe it wasn't, IRR, maybe it was text was spelled wrong or something like that. I can just simply go in here and we can do what it actually should be. And if this color pat wasn't supposed to be 13 and it was actually supposed to be color 30, very, very quickly I can make these changes, and once I hit OK, it's going to go back through those files and it's going to make the appropriate change. If it sees this layer, it'll change it to this. So from a customizing standpoint and making sure that everything is all on the same page, so to speak, it's definitely such a time saver going through this. I can't tell you how many blocks I've audited and just taken a snapshot of what those are, made mass changes, and then go get a drink, take a little nap, 5-minute nap, just on thousands of blocks. So very, very cool tool to be able to do that kind of stuff on. But let's see here. So from a color perspective then, if we're going to try to use these cheat sheets or the resources that we have, this is another great tool and a great resource that we have. And this really pertains to then, actually let me grab the location so that we can all be on the same page there. So in our land effects folder, we have all of these different sections, but in our admin, we have a lot of these files that I'm referencing here. The LFX pens, that hatch patterns, the irrigation symbols, even then our default CTB stuff. So when we're talking about customizing stuff and having this as a reference, this LFX pens is a really great place to just understand what colors we have for what layers or what thicknesses and stuff like that. But more specifically, this is where I kind of wanted to go, is our irrigation colors, because as you saw in our preferences here, we have an option for color code size pipe. And this color code size pipe is going to take these specific colors and it's going to apply these colors to it. So if these are not the colors that we want, and again, going back to the thickness of stuff, and maybe we've used one of those colors in our office standard and we need to bump that away, all we need to do is utilize this block layers. This block layers lets us convert. As it gets inserted, it lets us convert from one color to another. So we can find any one of those colors. So let's just say 193. And there it is. And we've asterisked land effects used colors here. And we can say 193 actually should be something else. So we can pick the color that we say we want. And now, from now on, when the pipe sizes, it will use that smallest pipe will get color 130 instead of 193. So a very, very quick change to how the system functions and how we can modify these things. So when it comes to smallest to largest from mainline and lateral line, again, we're going to go in to our preferences. And this has everything to do then about our pipe data defaults. So when we're talking about smallest to largest, as it sizes, we can set what sizes actually get used. So it's not a color, I can remove this guy here, and 3/4 will then be our new color 130. If I bring him back over, 1/2 inch will be our 130, and 3/4 will be our next one. So that's how it functions. So setting these pipe classes exactly how you want them right off the bat is going to just save you time when you get to the project level and you're sizing your pipes and stuff like that. That's where those changes, that's where it correlates to, is these sizes right here get dumped into what these colors are from a minimum to maximum setting. So once I get my pipe sizes set, and say, okay, then I know, and I have this color code size pipe option turned on, this is what the system's going to use. If I'm okay with, because these are all just going to print the same thickness anyways, and if I don't care that I see the different colors and I just want to see a single color and I apply that color to a specific thickness, we can uncheck that, and the system's going to use the pipe layer. So if we go to L pipe lateral, it's going to use this specific color as it's plotting, no matter if you size it or not. So then you can, this is where this layer set starts to be applied to how it interacts with that equipment there. So these colors here start getting utilized if that color code option is unchecked. If it's checked, it'll start utilizing these guys, in which case you can start customizing those layer colors within the block layers. So from there, how do we modify and make edits again to the fonts and stuff like that? So again, Batchman is a great, let me close this guy really quick, is a great resource, and this is somewhat of a newer improvement, but we have now an option for Textiles, and this Textiles is going to run that read command, redefine all textiles, based on your default preference set, which you have active. But if you're looking at being able to just see and update your callouts here or your textiles here, and if we were to look at our different preference sets here, you can see that not only do I have different layers and stuff like that, but my callout light here is my CT font. And if I change to Imperial and go to callout light, I've got this Swiss 721. So in the easiest way possible, I can activate my preference set. I can run the read command, and it's going to update any defined land effects textile in the drawing. And that's probably one of my most favorite commands when we get into details, when we get into just drawings in general that may have had the wrong textile assigned to it. There's a lot of just inner working AutoCAD that you have to go through with all your defined textiles to try to match properties or get them assigned to the right thing, when in fact it's as easy as making sure that you have the right preference set and then running the read command. And it's going to update everything perfectly. So again, if we're just trying to make those mass changes or anything like that, you can run Batchman, check textiles, make sure you have that current active preference set there, and just let the system change everything and update everything for you. So making changes to the fonts, making changes to all of your source files is really, really easy. But obviously, it's important to note that if you've customized the blocks themselves to a certain way, Land Effects is going to sort of redefine that textile based on what preference set is active as it gets inserted. So you might see a change, there might be something different there. So just understand that it's doing its best to make sure that it is sort of doing what it's told, basically. And if it's active and it's a different textile, it's going to update itself when it gets inserted. But the nice thing about that is you have your text manager here that you have full sort of fledged capability of adding your own textiles inside of this, and this all pertains to the preference set that is active. So if you wanted to make your own custom textile and apply it to one of your blocks, as long as it's active in here, it's going to hold true to that font, especially if you go ahead and redefine that textile. It'll update itself to match that, which is really, really nice. So you can kind of go even above and beyond the textiles that we have to offer there. All right. So we're going to go ahead and go back here real quick to our irrigation preferences. And here's where we're going to go ahead and see how all this functions here. I'm going to show you our defaults here, but just let's take a hypothetical. Maybe my default, which is this Valco 5 symbol here, maybe I want this guy minus the shadow. Maybe I want to add another attribute that shows me the number of heads that are tied to that valve itself. So how do we go about making our own custom valve symbol or valve call out here? So we're going to go ahead and just understand that too, these are the names of the blocks themselves. So just if we know where we're looking for the blocks in general, we can navigate pretty easily to where those are themselves. So we're going to go ahead and go over here. We're going to go into our blocks. We're going to go into our graphics, irrigation, callouts. So the one that we were looking for was the Valco 5. And from a callout perspective, there is a left and a right. So we're definitely going to want to make sure that we understand we do need to make two changes. We need to make one to the left and we need to make one to the right. The right symbol is what gets held in the preferences from a graphical thumbnail perspective. So just know that we are going to be making the Valco right into a schedule symbol. So we can open up both of these for time's sake. I am only going to open up this Valco R. Okay, so once I have him, I'm definitely going to, right off the bat, so I just don't make any adjustments to how anything else is working, I'm going to save him as, and we're going to just save him right in the same spot. And we'll wait for just a second. Don't know why he's taking so long. While we wait for this, Jer, is there any other questions?
Well, so far you must have been answering everybody's questions. So I don't see just a reminder that you're welcome to type in questions, people. We'll get them all queued up here.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go ahead and change this to 6, and we'll just save him. So now I can make changes without worrying about, hurting the integrity of one of our existing ones. The really cool part is if I mess up at any point of any of our existing symbols, I can just delete it and it'll download fresh. So there is no harm in messing with the blocks and trying to make them your own, customize them. If you go ahead and delete that block, Land Effects is going to download a new clean version for you. So there's really no harm in it. But I'm just going to take one of these guys here, and since this is the right call out, if I were to draw a polyline, this is essentially where the leader would kind of pull from. So I know that I'm on the right side of this here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this guy to say heads. So, and then I can obviously manipulate him to be middle left and move him around so that he automatically just grows out to the right there. So this is all fine and dandy. This is how I want him to be. So I can save him. And I can even then, if I need to, we'll go ahead and shoot a slide. Zoom extents. M-slide, it'll just create that SLD file that it needs. But I'm also then going to close him, and we're going to open up one last place, and that's in our schedule symbols. If I go to schedule symbols and I go down to the Valvcos and pick that same Valco 5 schedule symbol, Easiest way is to stick with the one that was closest or whatever else. Just make sure you're consistent. So there's as little changes as possible. I can go ahead and I can take, whatever it is that I need to out of him. I could even take this guy. Let's copy selection, bring him up. We'll change him to say head count. And we'll bring him over. Right here. Drag him over. See right here. So there's my quick run-of-the-mill new symbol here. So obviously I'm still in Valveco 5, so why don't we go ahead and we'll do a save as, and we'll go ahead and just change his 5 to a 6. That matches our call-out style that we got going on. He's known as a schedule symbol with that _SS, and the only thing that we're missing is the M slide. So we'll just save him right into the schedule symbol spot and close him. So now, if I go to my preferences, my new custom symbol, my schedule symbol, now is going to be here as Valveco 6. And you can see that he's updated with all of his stuff. I can pick him and set him now as my new default. So it really is that simple to make the changes that you need, customize those your own. It honestly, if you're never going to use any of these other ones, it wouldn't even hurt to just open up one of these ones and make the modifications to it and leave the names the same. It will not hurt a dang bit. It'll just now be your new updated version. So if I want Valveco 6 to always be the very first one that they pick, I can just renumber those and rename them so that it lands where it needs to be. But it's as simple as just making the changes to the file that you need and kind of go from there. So with that, this guy is going to always be used now when I do add a valve. He's always going to be assigned that way. And again, changes of the pipe data and stuff like that, we made our adjustments so that the 1/2 inch was out of there and whatnot. So the important part then is now, okay, I'm going to start a project. I've set those pieces of equipment up, or sorry, I've set those preferences up. Now I got to add my equipment. Before I do that, one last one, we'll go ahead and we will open up our symbols drawing here. Now, I tell Jared this every time that this gives me PTSD a little bit. There's a lot of stuff going on in this file. Don't be scared about it. Just understand it. It's broken out into sections. Our sprays, our emitters, point source stuff, rotors, auxiliary equipment. But it's set in a way that should be very easy to read. So understanding this just as you are trying to make things custom and change the symbols and stuff like that, know that we have, the reason that it's this vast and big is because we have assigned every symbol combination possible for every manufacturer that you get to pick in the system. So the initial little section of symbols that are clustered at the first of this little family tree is all of the possible nozzle options for a 2 to adjustable kind of radius. And so these numbers will never change, but the family styles will change. So how those symbols look is what I showed you in that PDF of the Customized Irrigation Getting Started Guide. So figuring out how to read this, it goes to this point. I'm going to open up my irrigation preferences, and I see that these are my little sets here. This gives you a snapshot of the 12-foot, just as a sample. It's not every symbol combination and every nozzle size, but it is every 12-foot option based on every one of those families. So if you liked this one, or maybe you liked this one, but you wanted to make a few changes to that family 5, that is where you're going to come here, navigate to family 5, and understand that if we were to find the 12s, this is the symbol set you were seeing. From this point, seeing any combination of these is now up to you to make the changes to. And these blue, and this is what's different from the Irrigation Getting Started guide symbol sets that you saw, but this blue is the block name. This is the file name that you're going to go and try to find in the specific spray set, okay? So if we're looking for N306Q, that's the file that we open to make the modifications for this specific symbol itself. So any one of those blue words there is the file name for that specific guy. Now, follow the tree out. Let's just take 15 foot, for example. These are now all of these schedule symbol sets. So there's a nozzle set, a piece of equipment that potentially is just this guy. Or maybe this manufacturer has all of these nozzles available. So there's a schedule symbol for every possible combination and whatever you pick. So this is the name in the schedule symbols folder that you're going to go and find. So it's as easy as knowing the specific source block as you place it into the drawing. And then if you use that symbol set, it's going to be one of these for your schedule symbol. And it'll bring in all of those. So it's going to be the same across any one of those. So it's very, very consistent, very easy to read. Same goes with our point source. We have our initial source blocks with the name that it is, and then the schedule symbols that you're going to look for to then make your modifications on. So when it comes down to it, this is a pretty common and easy one to go through. It's not so fast. If I'm trying to make my remote control valve symbol different than this, then I have the ability to just look for this file specifically, make the changes to that block, add my own, know that these are our defaults. So you can kind of tag yours on to the end if you want to. If you want an RCV 006, just add yours to the back of it. If you want to rename any of these so that as you add a valve, that this is the first one that you pick, or that gets picked and assigned, then name RCV 002 to RCV 001 and name this one 002, and they will switch orders. So it's very, very easy to just change the names of the files, get them in different orders, and then obviously the looks and the layers that get applied to them is all just a DWG. You do whatever you need to it. But when it comes to keeping and managing that standard, then being able to have this file, this irrigation symbols, is like a master of files to harness, yes, our defaults, but then what you want those to actually be or be a part of. You can start to put these in here so that you can manage and track if there's any differences than just the straight up standards that we offer. So these are just great examples of things that they utilize, Caltrans utilizes from this is our controller, and this is the one that they use, and how it is to be kind of different and named so that they can put it into the system and have a reference of it that way. So this is just a great resource. Don't be scared of it. It's a lot of stuff in it, but it's great to start to navigate and make the changes that you need to for it. So with that, I'm going to leave with one last thing. So we've made all of our changes. We've made all of our updates. We've tested things out. This is when we can start a project. And we can start that project and call it whatever. And the name. And then this is the important part. As I start this project, I set the preference set. This preference set now is going to pull in all of those defaults that we just spent our time making and managing and creating. So when we say okay to that, and we actually open this project up and we look at our pipe data, this pipe data and I did it on this one. I think I changed the imperial one, not the other one. This pipe data now is pulled based on the preference set that we selected. And from here, if I need to change anything about the sizing that's happening in the drawing itself, I don't go back to the preference set. I do that straight up from my irrigation manager, from the pipe data. I get to select these, remove it from the list, say okay. It will take on those properties within this project specifically and leave your standards alone. Leave your customized set all the way that it used to be. It's all still here, because if I make changes here, it's not going to affect anything in the drawing at that point. So it's very, very important that I know where and how I'm making those changes to where I can alter stuff after the fact. So we are out of time. Are there any last questions?
Well, had a really good question from Paul. Thanks for that. He was just asking about the valve call out. If there's any other attributes like heads that's supported, and I sent him the documentation on that. So there are some. That's something that is in pretty easy to find the documentation. Search for customized valve call out. But also know that's really easy for us to add new ones. I know we have had requests for the square foot served by a valve, but that's a little more difficult to actually pull off. So that would be great. I agree, that'd be great if it was possible. But as you get ones that you'd like, that's certainly something that we could add in the future.
Yep. And then obviously, if there's anything else you guys have questions with, are curious on how to customize, or maybe just frustrated that it maybe can't go as far as you are trying to get it, give us examples. Send us examples. Tell us what we're after here. And, that's what the wish list is for. That's what we're here for, to try to point you in a good direction and figure out a workflow that does help everything. But I'm going to state it again. Everything in here is fully customizable. And when it comes down to it, it's just what you're willing to give up for more automated processes or more accurate results. So with that, then I guess we will call it a day.
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.